global warming real? Is climate change irreversible? Why are carbon emissions still rising? Join host Dr. Alberto Troccoli, a global leader in climate science and its application to the energy sector, as he unpacks these pressing issues. Through candid conversations with leading experts, get ready to demystify climate change and explore its many layers. So, let's communicate!
Hello, I'm Alberto Troccoli, and welcome to the Let's Communicate podcast. In this episode, our guest is Dr. Vautard. He's a co-chair of Working Group 1 of IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. I hope you enjoy our conversation. Hello, Robert. Very nice to be with you here at this podcast, Let's Communicate.
Hi. Very nice to be with you.
Yeah, thank you very much for accepting my invitation. We go back a few years now of collaboration and so on. So, well, I think we should state that from the start. And importantly, you are the chair of the Working Group 1 of the Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change. Let's call it IPCC for short. I'm so happy that you are here today with us to talk about some of the pressing issues of climate. Before we start, would you like to give us a bit of a highlight of your lengthy career in climate and all your expertise that you accrued over this many years to reach the climax of the position now at the IPCC?
So thanks. I started actually as a mathematician. I did my training in mathematics, and then, but my passion was always meteorology. So I did my PhD in meteorology, dynamical meteorology. I like to see, vortices, how the meteorology is unfolding in a kind of random way with vortices, with fronts and areas where it rains, where you have thunderstorms, and then I started to think that meteorology is fine. There's many people working and very good science with many people. And what can I do a bit more for society and for protecting the environment in some sense, or participating to protect the environment? And then I moved to to the air pollution modeling. So I did some studies to better understand the chemistry in the atmosphere and the air pollution, and to make models for air pollution. And then quickly in the 2000s, there was starting to be a very amazing extreme events in the climate. And because our air pollution models were working quite well, I thought I'd better move to something even more challenging, which is the climate change problem. And then I started. That's been now about 20 years. I'm working in climate change issues, and then my government proposed me to apply for being co-chair of Working Group 1. So I accepted and was elected as co-chair together with my fellow co-chair Xiaoye Zhang from China. In summer 2023, so 1 year ago, and now we are working towards the work to be done for the cycle, the reports of IPCC, the next reports.
Very good, and that's the seventh cycle, is that correct?
Exactly.
And they happen every 6 or 7 years, thereabout. And
yes, absolutely.
And maybe we add also that Working Group 1 is about the climate science. So you're on the top of what's happening around in terms of publications and latest science.
Yes. So Working Group 1 is the physical basis for climate change. Climate change is not only physics, but basically Working Group 1 groups all the physics and the natural systems in general, and we try to see how these natural systems are perturbed by human activities, essentially.
That's great. That's be very good to go a bit deeper into the topics that you're covering as a co-chair. Before we get into the questions, a couple of things. So first, I'd just like to give a brief overview of our podcast, Let's Communicate. I already mentioned to you that this is my attempt to try to bring together people from the various sides of the debate on climate change, from the people who think that nothing is happening and that actually spewing more carbon emissions is beneficial for the environment. There are people also advocating that, to people who think that there's not going to be tomorrow because we are in deep trouble. And so in this context, I like to bring a bit of balance in the discussion and bring really experts like you to understand better what is really happening with our climate and what the solutions could be as well. To just get the questions going, I have a few quick fire questions, very simple, and feel free to pass if you don't, but I'm sure you know the answers much better than I do. So can you give us an estimate? This is number one, an estimate for how much temperature has changed in the last 150 years globally.
So I can give you even a very accurate estimate, which is currently 1.25, something like that. We are between 1.2 and 1.3. And this is the change in temperature in degrees between now or the last 10 years and the pre-industrial period, which is the end of the 19th century. So this is one thing that is important. That may seem not very much, 1 degree or 1.2, 1.3 degrees. But the difference in temperature between glacial climate and today is about 4 degrees. So if we can imagine what the climate was about 20,000 years ago with a glacial period, we could cross the British Channel between London and Paris by walking, because the sea level was 120 meters below, just the Rhine River to cross. It's only 4 degrees less than today. So 1 degree is an extremely high change in temperature if it's taken globally.
Can you give us an estimate of the amount of change due to human emissions of this 1.2 degree that you mentioned? What is the percentage due to humans?
So if we take global temperature, the contribution of human activities is 100%. It's very simple.
Okay. And the third question is, so what is your best estimate of how much the global temperature will be in 50 years, or let's say 2100, just roughly?
This depends obviously on what we are emitting in the atmosphere. It can go from, say, 1.5 degrees, it would be difficult, to about 4 to 5 degrees. 5 degrees is probably unlikely because there are policies, but basically the range is between 1.5 degrees and 4 degrees.
Very good. And lastly, can you give us an estimate of the risk in percentage of hitting one of the major tipping points that you know very well, like the thermohaline circulation, the melting of the permafrost, and so on?
So it depends obviously on the tipping point itself, but in general, it is very difficult to put a probability on this. We are not even sure this will happen.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much. This is very useful to set the scene, and we're ready now to go deeper into some of the points we already discussed. So maybe I go back to your point about the -4 degrees and how much was the sea level lower than today, and what are the implications for an increase in temperature of an additional maybe 2 degrees.
Yes. So about 20,000 years ago, the global temperature was about 4 degrees below, 4 to 5 degrees below today. And the sea level was 120 meters below what it is today. That's an extremely important difference. The climate of Europe was completely different. The climate of many regions was completely different. The importance of a tenth of a degree is extremely important. I just give an example. In the last 20 years, the temperature has changed by about 0.4 degrees. The extreme heat events have been multiplied by 4. So that's the frequency is now 4 times more than 20 years ago. We have a doubling time of extremes, which is every decade. So the climate of 10 years ago is very different already than the climate of today. So that's important to have these figures in mind.
Excellent. But some people perhaps have some difficulties to get their heads around the fact that, we are looking at an increase in temperature in the last 30 years. And you already mentioned that in 20,000 years, we had a -4 degrees. So, already much bigger. So, and at the same time, you also stated before in the questions that we have 100% certainty that the increase in temperature is due to human carbon emissions. So first of all, if you can, try to address the question of how you place this 1 degree in the context of much larger changes in the past. And then also related to that, as we discussed, the 100%, how can we state with confidence that 100% is due? From a science point of view, it sounds a little odd to talk about 100%, no? Because there's always some uncertainty.
So there are many questions there. The question. Let me try to answer the last one. It's been about 30 to 40 years that people have investigated this question of the responsibility of human activities in the warming, even before the warming was clear. I mean, in the 80s or the 70s of the last century, the warming was not clear, and people were already worried about the future effect of greenhouse gases, and they were making predictions about what it would do. So these were kind of theoretical prediction based on very simple calculation on physics. And actually the number and the warming that was predicted is about the same as what we are witnessing today. But it's not only a question of predicting with models or theory. It's the fact that everything actually is consistent in what we observe and in what we model. So there are multiple lines of evidence. For instance, what we know about greenhouse effect is that when we have greenhouse gases accumulating, there is less energy that is coming out from the earth than energy that is coming in from the sun. So what we know is that the shift, we observe it from this shift. We observe it from satellites. We have been observing it for decades from satellites, and the numbers we get are consistent with the theory, are consistent with the models, and are giving the consistent response of the Earth. The Earth is warming to adjust to this shift, and the number, the 1 degree that we have, is consistent also with theory and observations. So everything is consistent. Of course, one can say that we are not sure 100%, but what does it mean when everything is consistent? So that is why today we say it's a fact. It's due to human activities, because there is no other potential cause that could trigger that warming. Also, to answer your second or first question, to put that in perspective, a climate that would be 1 degree more than the pre-industrial climate has already occurred in the past. So it's not, the temperature itself has already been witnessed. Even in the Quaternary, it's a temperature that we had, for instance, about 100,000 years ago. A bit more, 120,000 years ago, and this type of temperature we now know what it means. We know, for instance, that during this era, the sea level was a few meters above today. But what is problematic is not the temperature itself; it's the pace of warming. It's the very fast way it is warming. If it was warming over thousands of years, we would have time to adapt. But it's warming over tens of years. So it's really problematic, because species do not have time to adapt, and we will struggle to adapt to many of the consequences.
Okay, yeah, thanks for the clear explanation. And also to add, you were referring to some studies, I guess, also in the mid 1800, with Eunice Newton Freud, who was the first scientist to discover the link between carbon emissions and temperature. And also, I think it's worth mentioning the studies by Exxon in the late 1960s, which showed that there was a close link through the modeling that they had at the time, which was a bit primitive, but it's still useful to show some. And we do rely on models, no? So we do a lot of use of models for the past and for the future. So, often also we hear about all these limitations about models that have a lot of problems with clouds, with several processes that are happening. We know that climate is so complex, it's difficult to reproduce it accurately, but we still have these models that we use. So how useful do you think these models are, and how confident are we that if they tell us that the temperature is increasing in the future, that's going to happen?
So models are, we have to understand what models are, and what they are able to do and what they are not able to do. Climate models are program computers that calculate from the physics laws and the basic physics some trajectory of the meteorology, the ocean, the cryosphere. So they describe the atmosphere, the oceans, the currents, the salinity of the ocean, the temperature. They describe the land surface and the forests. They describe also the cryosphere. So they try to describe the Earth system as a whole, and in every compartment, and possibly at every location on the Earth. So it's, of course, a very complex system. We have many processes acting at the same time. Some of them are less known or represented less accurately than others. I'm just citing one thing, for instance. The rate of ice melting is something that is difficult to model, to estimate, because we are talking about the dynamics of the cryosphere, the dynamics of glaciers, of ice shelves, ice sheets. And there are some very detailed mechanisms, such as how much when we have a cliff of ice in the Antarctic, how much this ice cliff is going into the sea and producing icebergs. It's very difficult to model, extremely difficult to model, because we have many things acting at the same time. The temperature of the sea, which is just below the glacier, the thickness of the glacier, everything, and the whole dynamics, and how everything comes together. It's extremely difficult. So at the moment, it's a bit difficult, but it's also very important, because the rate of water melting will determine, of course, the fate of the sea level. So there's huge impacts on the coastal, the sea level, and also the salinity in the ocean, and also it's the basis of the ocean circulation, also, especially in the Arctic. So it's a very important process. However, whatever the speed of melting that we have, this doesn't change the basic physics of the atmosphere, and the fact that when we have more greenhouse gases, we have more temperature. So it does not change that. So it can be complex. This ice thing. It can be complex, and it can determine whether or not, for instance, the general circulation of the ocean will more or less collapse or stop, with consequences, of course. But it doesn't change the global picture. It does not change the global picture.
Okay, that's a very good overview of the models. And in terms of extreme events, also, you mentioned at the beginning that you've worked on extreme events for many years now, and you are also involved in this global weather attribution project. I think it's a project, isn't it? And but some people still, are debating whether the extremes are increasing or not. I mean, there seems to be some certainty around heat waves that are increasing. At the same time, there are also people debating the fact that with increasing temperature, there could be more death to do with heat waves, but they also look at deaths due to cold events, like standard winter, basically. I mean, that's a normal kind of behavior in physiological behavior, that there are more deaths during winter than summer, but of course, with heat, it's less controllable. But what about other events like, often people talk about hurricanes and so on. And can you tell us a bit also about your studies? How confident can we be about, the attribution studies that you're doing to try to detect whether these events are really out of the distribution or not?
So this actually drives me back to the previous question a little bit. By just saying that while we know the global energetics of the Earth, and we can predict it pretty accurately, when it comes to predicting what will happen in a given region or city or country. Then it becomes more complicated because not only we have climate change, but we also have what we call natural variability. I mean, climate extremes have always existed. They are not new. There are some of them which can be considered as new, and I can talk about it. But climate extremes have always more or less existed. Heat waves have already been witnessed all along the years in the 20th century, in the 19th century, or extreme precipitation, floods, fires, etc. What happens now is that it's not that they just are appearing. It's just that they are getting more frequent, more intense, and they are creating more impacts. For instance, as we were saying a little bit before, when we talk about heat extremes worldwide over land, the frequency doubles every 10 years currently. So that's one thing. So a heat wave that would be extreme, like having a return period of 20 years, some 10 years ago, would have a return period of 10 years. It means that they have a chance of occurring, which is doubled today. So that is why we see more heat waves today, and they are also much more intense. So what happens, and that is now characteristic of climate change, is now we break records, and sometimes by far. This is exactly what happened, for instance, in British Columbia in 2021, in June. And this is also what happened in London, for instance, in 2022, where 40 degrees were reached, while the previous record was 36 or 37. I can't remember exactly. This is also what we see in huge floods that we are witnessing, like in the Central Europe or Nepal currently, or in many regions of the earth. The scale of the floods, the scale of the heavy rainfall is getting really large. And so this is exactly what climate change actually does. It really feeds the kind of energy of this kind of extreme events. So for heat, it's relatively easy to understand. More global temperature will induce more local temperature also. But for heavy precipitation, it's a bit more complicated, but not much more. Warmer temperature allows more humidity. That's a physical law. 1 degree more allows 7% more humidity to be there in the atmosphere. So more humidity, more precipitation, and also more evaporation. So it's the water cycle is getting a little bit fastened. So it is not that we have new events. It is that we have more intense events, more frequent. We also see in some cases events that we have never experienced. I'm thinking of the fires in Canada in 2023, which were huge and enormous. And this is likely due to climate change. It's been demonstrated. For the Amazon fires, it's a little bit different because Amazon fires are essentially triggered by deforestation. They are amplified and they amplify climate change, but the main driver is really deforestation. So to do these links between climate change and extreme events, we now have sophisticated statistical tools which allow to infer what we call the changes in the probabilities or the likelihood of the events. They are not extremely accurate in the sense that they have large uncertainties yet, but when we say that, for instance, heat waves have had a doubling frequency in the last 10 years, of course, there is a margin of uncertainty, but it's something like between 1.5 and 3 or something like that. So it's not very large.
That's good. So I must say, I'm not familiar with all the events that you mentioned. So I take your word for the extreme events that you mentioned, and people can go and have a look, of course. But it seems clear from all you said that things are lined up. So there is a rapid increase in temperature that is linked to that also increase in emissions that is unprecedented, and the extreme events go with that, this type of extreme events that you discussed. So I think given that, we can still argue whether there is another cause, but it becomes more and more difficult to find something that would be counter to this, no, to produce something that explains what is happening in a different way. Have people tried to do that?
Well, if it is, if the question is whether there could be other causes of what we observe, it depends really what we are talking about. If we are talking about the global temperature and changes, there is nothing. There has been some. Trials to explain that with natural variability, with natural phenomena like volcanic, solar, but all the calculations have been done. It's all included in the models and in, of course, in the observations also. And we know today that natural causes such as volcanoes or solar have very little impacts globally. They can have some regional impacts, like in the northern hemisphere, in some regions, but or very intermittent impacts. For instance, a volcano can create, for a few years, a decrease in temperature that has happened already, but it doesn't stay for decades. The effect doesn't stay for decades. It's just a temporary effect. It can create a lot of trouble also. The volcanic eruptions create a decrease in temperature that can be important, and that can change that can impact the agriculture, for instance. That can be very important. We have seen that in the past, but it's not a general. It does not create a general trend over decades. So natural causes are always have been studied a lot, actually, but they do not bring a sufficient forcing, what we call forcing in our jargon, to perturb the climate. What is also important is that there is natural variability with changes in temperature from decades to decades. So this is also normal, or from year to year. But the amplitude of those changes are rather low. It's about 0.2 degrees. When we talk about year-to-year change in temperature, which is very far from the 1 degree that we observe from climate change and human activities.
Okay, so I'd like to now move a bit to the just understanding a little better the IPCC process. You've been very open about the limitations of the models, the uncertainties, and that we still trying to understand how all the components interact with each other. How difficult is it to bring these issues to the discussion within IPCC? How do you navigate the system and convey these uncertainties while trying to stay on message? Trying to keep also the focus on what you said, the increasing temperature and so on. There is it must be very difficult with all this, many people who are involved in the process.
So the IPCC process is very specific because it's Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. So we have governments deciding what they want to know about climate change. And they want to know basically what is the status of scientific research and findings every 7 years. And we have to have, it's a very specific process because it has to be a universal process. Each word has to be understood exactly in the same way in all cultures, in all countries. So we need to have a very calibrated language. When we do a statement in a summary for policymaker, it's always a statement which has attached some very specific uncertainty language like low confidence, medium confidence, or high confidence, with a very specific way to arrive to this level of confidence, and it's really calibrated. So sometimes it seems a little bit awkward to read that we have low confidence that something will be happening. It may seem that we could understand it as we have a higher confidence that it is not happening, this is not the case. It's just that we have a weak signal of or a weak understanding of something that could happen, but we are not sure. So in this case, it's low confidence. But in many cases, and you will see that in the summaries, we have medium or high confidence. When we have high confidence, it means that it's very unlikely that we are wrong. We are never 100% sure, of course, except for the case for human activities acting on global temperatures, and in a few other cases like that. But otherwise, we have to have a very calibrated language, so it's understood in the same way, and we have rules to determine this levels of confidence. So that's for confidence, but also what we are doing is actually starting from the science, from the publications that are made every week or every day even, and the rate, the volume of publication, is increasing exponentially. Actually, it's we think that it's doubling every 7 years, about that in climate science. So we have a lot of work of reading what is being found. There's a lot of duplications in the studies, of course, but there are also some topics for which there are many studies looking at one thing from different angles and finding the same result, actually, in which case we have a lot of evidence for what we're talking about. And in the end, the reports have to do an assessment. So an assessment is much stronger than a review. It's it's a synthesis of what people say. It's not a review of all the literature. So it's based on a review, but it's a further step. We do this assessment by narrowing, by saying if we have, for instance, studies showing that we have more fires in several regions, but sometimes we have less fire in a few regions. And we understand now there are theoretical studies showing that if temperature increases, then it increases the risk of fires. So we can have 100 papers like that. And then we can arrive to a statement which is that climate change is increasing the risk of wildfires globally. That may not be in every single region, but globally, in a global way. So that's the kind of narrowing of the information into a single statement based on tens or hundreds of publications. That's what we are looking for, actually. That's because this is really policy relevant. It means that we have to increase the adaptation to risk of fires. And we have to protect populations for that. So this is extremely policy relevant. So what we are looking for is the kind of messages, the kind of statements that would be useful for people, actually, and for governments. So this narrowing of the information, this synthesis of the information is done in several steps, which are calibrated also. Review of literature, writing chapters as synthesis. Then we have executive summaries in chapters, in every chapter. Then we put them together and we have what we call a technical summary. And then from the technical summary, we are still narrowing a bit more to the summary for policymakers. And that is a document which has only 10 to 30 pages. And that contains the very heart of the information. So that's our mission, that's our mandate, and we have to do that for each report.
That's shed quite a bit of light in the process. That's useful. I was struck by your initial sentence. You said that IPCC does what governments ask you to do. So could you just briefly tell us a bit more about that? Because, I mean, there's like 200 governments, and what kind of questions are they asking? And how can you make sense of all this requests?
So the governments of the earth are diverse. The members of IPCC are 195. And the IPCC works in a consensus mode, which means that every decision has to be agreed by all members. So usually decisions and what government wants as a whole is quite broad, not very narrow topic. That could be, but it's not the case. So there are two types of products, I would say, actually three types of products that IPCC does. The first one is the general assessment, what we call the assessment reports. So they do not ask anything particular. They usually ask scientists and co-chairs to produce reports that are comprehensive, which means that include all the knowledge, basically all the recent knowledge. And they just ask us to be as comprehensive as possible. And so that's the first thing. And the second type of reports is special reports that could be on a specific topic. For instance, in this cycle, in the 7th cycle, we will have a special report on climate change and cities. So it's a very specific report because it has to provide policy statements for policymakers, but not only for governments, but also for city managers and for city and for regional managers and local managers as well. So it means that we will look at very specific things. It can be from the climate side, the climate in cities, but also from the governance side, governance of cities. What type of governance is producing less effect than other types of governance. So it's really an interdisciplinary report. And the third one is what we call the methodology report. It's type of report which will actually give guidelines for countries to report their emissions. So it's so we have in this cycle two, actually. One is on what we call the short-lived climate forcers. So that are the gases and particulate matter and air pollution things and how they should be reported. And also one on carbon dioxide removal, which is these kind of new technologies that could potentially help to take CO2 out of the atmosphere and put it back in the fossil reserves. But it's still, I would say, it's still a very hypothetical option.
Okay, and just to understand a little bit more about the process, can you give us some hints about what you're working on as a committee in order to try to improve some of the processes in IPCC? What are the challenges in that respect that you are facing at the moment?
We are, IPCC is an international body. So the Bureau of IPCC is about 30 to 40 people, scientists, and we are elected by the country. So it's not a club, but we are elected by the countries. And then we have very strict rules, especially rules and procedures and also principles. One principle is to be fully inclusive, which means that we cannot exclude any viewpoint from any area of the world. And the world is diverse. We have different economies based on different resources, and there are challenges in every corner of the world. So it means that we have to be very inclusive and try to be as balanced as possible. So I think probably the first challenge that we have at the moment is that most of the many of the papers and even the access to literature is extremely imbalanced towards the north, the global north versus global south. Global south really struggles even to access to literature. Not even speaking about science, data, things. So there is a huge gap actually, and a huge imbalance worldwide in the science making and in the science reporting. So what I think IPCC should be extremely careful about that. So what we want to do maybe in this cycle is be more and more inclusive, especially with publications that would not be in English, for instance. That could be an innovation. We still do not completely know how we will proceed. We also want to include more non-peered reviewed literature, especially for the Climate Change and Cities report. Many of the knowledge, most of the knowledge is in gray literature, in practical, all the climate plans or at the city level. They are not published in peer literature, of course, but the practice is giving a lot of information also. We have many areas where it's the information is not in the published peer-reviewed literature. So, and finally, there is also a lot of knowledge, especially for adaptation, but not only, also on physics, which is coming from the indigenous people. So, if we look at mountains in the Andes or elsewhere, how to manage crisis or rapid not climatic change, but rapid weather changes, and how to adapt is well known from indigenous people, and we want to draw more and more from there, and not only from technology or science in peer-reviewed literature. So that is inclusivity is a real challenge. How to improve process is a long way. It's a long journey, actually, and we are talking about this topic almost every week. There are other challenges in IPCC. Maybe the fact that it has a long history. It's now 35 years old. There has been challenges, especially in the 2000s with the climate gate issues and stuff like that, which also triggered necessity of having a lot of rigor in what we do, traceability. So everything is extremely rigorously set, and that, of course, has a side effect, which is the rigidity of and the fact that we cannot move fast on topics. For instance, on COVID. It was not possible. We would probably have liked to have a special report, maybe on topics like COVID. Can we draw knowledge from what happened in COVID for climate, reduction of emissions, what happened in the economy, in the health, in the cities, in the emissions. But that was not possible because we cannot decide of a new report like that in a few months. We have a program of work, and we can only include things in what exists. So we did include COVID consequences and lessons, actually, for climate. But it was. We cannot create new. We cannot move rapidly. Agility is not easy in IPCC.
Excellent. So it's great to hear about this inclusivity. I was not aware, to be honest, and it's very good that there is an emphasis on that. And by the way, also just to explain to the audience, the gray literature. I mean, there is basically a distinction between the academic papers that are peer-reviewed and the gray literature, which is essentially reports that anybody can publish and then they can put it on the web. But sometimes they are reviewed by peers, sometimes they're not. So that's why it's called gray, because it's in between the two camps of where you can just put something on the web and something that it's actually peer reviewed. But in terms of inclusivity and really just to wrap up, I mean, Kenya can you give us also an idea of how people can contribute to IPCC if they wanted? Perhaps now for this cycle, maybe it's too late, but in general, can you? But so just in the spirit of inclusivity, because you talked about inclusivity about papers, but I understand also the point of view of indigenous people, and but anybody, to bring new perspectives into IPCC. So can you tell us a bit more about this process?
Yeah, so it's not too late. It's not too late. We have different ways of participating. The first one is simply to write papers and to publish knowledge. So I think that's the most novel way to do it. Publish papers on new knowledge, on new things, especially for researchers. Another way is, of course, to be an expert for designing the outline of our reports. So that's just one meeting in 1 week, and we are gathering experts. There are calls for nominations in every country to participate to the scoping of reports. So that's just one meeting, so that's not taking a lot of time. But you can be authors, and there are various types of authors. There are lead authors, coordinating lead authors, contributing authors, which are less involved. And one can be reviewer also. Look at the report, review the report, and check if the knowledge is complete or whether something is missing in the report. So actually, reviewers are kind of authors also, because we have to take into account what reviewers want, not accepting everything that reviewers want, but at least justifying why we do not accept, or why we accept as authors. And yes, and there are different roles, but essentially authors, experts, reviewers, and of course also being in the bureau. But that's then it's once in a cycle. So.
But so how would someone in practice go about contributing? I mean, if someone wanted to be a reviewer or an author, what's the process?
So the process is done through calls, open calls. It's not from IPCC directly. It's IPCC has a focal point in each country, in each member country. And the list of the focal points is given on the website of IPCC. So either in the country there is a call, for instance, in my country, in France, each time that we are calling for authors, our ministries are issuing calls, open calls to contribute. Within France, but other countries, many countries do like that, but maybe not all countries. So that's why it's important to check and contact the focal points from IPCC if people want to contribute.
Very good. So I encourage people to go to the IPCC website and follow through. And in case probably there are some contacts there to reach out to in terms of getting more information. But that's really helpful. Thank you very much, Robert. And I really want to thank you because I learned a lot with your conversation with you. And I hope to get in touch also soon. I know you're very busy, so it's difficult to get hold of you. But I actually want to encourage people to go to your weekly posts on LinkedIn, which is really helpful. It tells us what you're doing, and also some events that are happening, explanations of specific climate events. So that's really helpful. Thank you for doing that, Robert, and thank you for being here and talking with us.
Yeah, thank you. I hope it can be of interest for many, and at least for some.
Certainly. Thank you so much. Thank you, Robert.
Yeah, thank you.
If you enjoyed this episode, I encourage you to explore our other interviews and subscribe to our channel to receive notifications about future episodes, which we plan to release weekly.